Your home is a library of forgotten languages. The everyday objects you touch hold the faint whispers of lost worlds. These are the unheard echoes, 22 forgotten dialects preserved not in books, but in the pottery, tools, and textiles of ordinary life. By the end of this journey, you will see the physical world as a living archive of human speech. We will explore how a simple clay pot can reveal an ancient trade route, and why the marks on a wooden beam contain a builder's secret code. What forgotten story is waiting in the objects you use every day? These lost ways of speaking were the heartbeat of tiny, isolated communities. A forgotten dialect is not merely an old language, but a deeply local form of speech that has faded from memory, often without a single person left who can speak it fluently. Think of it as a unique cultural fingerprint. It is distinct from a major dead language like Latin, which we know from countless books and official documents. These dialects often vanished quietly, leaving behind only the faintest of clues. Linguists identify them by their unique sounds, their peculiar grammar, and their own special words that set them apart from the larger language they branched from. When one of these dialects disappears, it is like a lens shattering. We lose a specific way of seeing the world, a collection of words for local plants, weather patterns, and social customs that simply do not exist anywhere else. This understanding reveals just how fragile these linguistic artifacts truly are, but their whispers have not completely vanished. They have been hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to listen. The search for these echoes leads to the most surprising of places, embedded within the ordinary objects of daily life. These objects were never meant for museums or archives. A clay pot was made to carry water. A wooden chest was built to store grain. Their primary purpose was survival, and that very practicality is what makes them such honest records. Because they were used every single day, they absorbed the language of their lives almost by accident. The potter's hand might incise a series of marks along the wet clay rim, a local counting system understood only in her village. A carpenter fitting a joint for a chest might carve a tiny symbol his father taught him, a word for good fortune in a dialect that has no written alphabet. Even the way a tool handle is worn smooth from a specific grip, or the particular stitch used to mend a torn textile, encodes a piece of linguistic data. These are the unguarded moments where a culture's unique way of speaking leaves its mark. For linguists, this accidental preservation is a treasure trove. Official documents can be formal and stiff, but the scratch on a piece of furniture is pure, unfiltered speech. And so our search for the first of these unheard echoes begins with the most fundamental of human creations, a material shaped by fire and human hands, baked clay. That hardened clay, fired in a kiln 2,000 years ago, carries more than just the ghost of wine or oil. It carries the quick, practical shorthand of a potter at work. In the bustling ports of the ancient Mediterranean, these amphorae were the shipping containers of their day, stacked high on merchant ships. Each ceramic vessel was a vital link in a vast economic chain. And before they were fired, potters would often mark their wares. For a long time, archaeologists assumed these were simple owner's marks or basic batch numbers. But a closer look reveals something far more intimate. These scratches and symbols are now understood as a form of shorthand dialect, specific to the pottery workshops themselves. Think of a series of dots and slashes on a Roman amphora found in a remote Iberian province. They do not correspond to any known Latin letter or numeral. Instead, they match a local Celtic dialect used for inventory, a counting system spoken in the marketplace that never made it into official stone carvings. The potter was not writing for an empire. He was communicating with his neighbors using a local tongue pressed into wet clay. The fire that hardened the vessel forever preserved that commercial dialect, a language of trade and measurement that would have echoed in the harbors. From the sea and its fired clay, our search for echoes leads us inland to the deep quiet of the forest and the language held within wood. Deep within the heavy timber frames of a medieval house, a secret assembly language is carved into the wood. These are not just random scratches from an axe or chisel. Builders used a sophisticated system of marks, a kind of three-dimensional blueprint, to ensure each massive beam slotted perfectly into its partner during construction. You would find Roman numerals and geometric shapes, a practical code understood by carpenters across Europe. But in isolated regions like the Black Forest of Germany or the Scottish Highlands, this code took a remarkable local turn. The standard marks began to incorporate words and concepts from the local dialect, creating a unique assembly language that only a village carpenter would fully understand. For instance, a specific triangular notch used to lock a joint might be called a knot in the local dialect. This was not the word for a tangle in a rope. It was a specialized term, absent from standard German or English dictionaries, that named a particular joint technique passed from one generation of builders to the next. Each symbol carved into the oak was a spoken word from a disappearing tongue, a term for a direction, a number, or a type of cut. The entire frame becomes a three-dimensional dictionary of a builder's dialect, a frozen conversation between craftsmen that has outlasted their spoken words by centuries. Just as these wooden frames structured the homes of a community, the textiles woven inside them bound that community's identity together with silent, colorful threads. Those silent, colorful threads carry entire cosmologies. Within the intricate patterns of tribal textiles, from the high Andes to the vast steppes of Central Asia, we find our third dialect. This is not a language of sounds, but of symbols, a visual speech woven directly into cloth. These designs are far more than simple decoration. They are a coded language where every color, every geometric shape, and the precise sequence of lines holds a specific meaning. Think of a blanket woven by the Navajo people. A particular zigzag pattern running through the wool is not just a pleasing motif. To a person who understood this visual dialect, that pattern narrated a key part of a creation myth, a story of emergence and identity. The symbols formed a strict vocabulary, a grammar of visual storytelling that has been lost to most modern speakers. Even the colors themselves speak in this forgotten tongue. The deep red of a West African Kent cloth did not come from a commercial dye. It was made from the root of a specific local plant, a plant known only by its name in a tribal dialect. That name and the knowledge of how to prepare it was part of the weaver's secret linguistic world. Every step, from gathering the plants to setting up the loom, was guided by an oral tradition that has since fallen silent. The resulting textile is a woven manuscript. Its patterns are the syntax that once governed how an entire culture told its stories, recorded its history, and signified social status. The fabric is a map of a linguistic landscape, one we can still see but struggle to fully read. This fragile language of thread and dye finds its more permanent counterpart in the enduring strength of stone. Stone gives a voice to the silent and the ancient. Across the weathered standing stones of Scotland and the massive temples of Malta, you find a language not of words but of shapes, hammered into rock with immense patience. These are the Quarryman symbols, a fourth dialect carved for eternity. While some, like the straight lines of Ogham script, are formally recognized, countless other marks remain mysterious local tongues. A series of concentric circles, a set of hollows called cup marks, or a winding spiral were not idle decorations. They were signatures, territorial claims, or ritual instructions understood by a specific community. The very method of carving was part of this dialect, the technique of pecking, where a craftsman used a harder stone to patiently chip the surface, created a distinct texture that varied from one region to another, a local accent in the very stone itself. The placement of a spiral on a particular stone face, for instance, might have conveyed a complex message about ancestral lineage, a story of a family's origin that has since been forgotten. Or a specific pattern of cup and ring marks could have served as a calendar, marking a solstice sunrise that would only align with the carving on one morning of the year. In a world without paper, stone gave permanence to the most ephemeral parts of human speech, turning whispers into geology. Just as the blacksmith's hammer would later shape metal, these stone tools shaped a durable record of human thought, forging a link to the next great material that preserved our lost languages. The heat of the forge left its own permanent signature on the world. On the worn handles of hammers and the heavy blades of plows, blacksmiths stamped a subtle technical dialect right into the metal. These small glyphs and careful file marks were far more than a simple signature. They formed a precise, specialized language spoken between smiths, a code that conveyed the secrets of the steel itself. In a workshop where multiple languages might be spoken, or where many workers could not read, this visual shorthand was essential. A specific pattern of dots near the base of a scythe, crafted in 19th century rural France, did not just identify the maker. It told any other smith that the blade was tempered for a specific purpose, perhaps for cutting a type of marsh grass known only by its name in a forgotten local patois. The glyph was a quality control mark, a set of instructions, and a material word all at once. This was the unspoken language of the forge, a jargon of fire and iron that guaranteed a tool's reliability. It transformed a simple object into a durable record of technical knowledge, a dialect that ensured a plow would last for generations. This durable language of metalwork finds a more delicate, personal expression in the intricate art of the jeweler. Even the most personal adornments carry hidden speech. In the delicate hallmarks stamped onto a wedding ring or a silver pendant, we discover our sixth dialect, the jeweler's secret language of metal and stone. These tiny stamps were official guarantees of purity and origin, but they often held a second, more intimate layer of meaning, drawn directly from the local vernacular. A master jeweler in a remote Balkan village would imprint a hallmark that mixed the standard marks for silver with a stylized symbol, perhaps a lynx or a bear. To an outsider, it was just a decoration, but to the community, that animal was the word for the bride's family name in a Slavic dialect that has since vanished. It was a silent proclamation of identity worn on the hand for a lifetime. The very vocabulary of the craft was also a local dialect. The names for specific gemstone cuts and settings were not universal. A particular way of faceting a local quartz to catch the light might be called a mountain star in one town and a lake sparkle in the next, each term a hyper-local word for beauty and reflection. These small, wearable objects were more than valuable. They were compact archives carrying the weight of a community's identity in symbols and specialized words. Just as these precious items held personal stories, the humble containers that stored life's essentials preserved the language of daily sustenance. The wood of a barrel holds more than just wine or spirits. It holds the precise, practical language of the cooper who shaped it. In the dim light of a workshop, a craftsman would incise a series of marks along the curved staves and flat heads of his barrels. These were not random scratches, but a sophisticated system of notation. They denoted the exact capacity, the specific contents, and often the intended destination for the cask. This was the cooper's dialect, a code born from the absolute necessity of accurate communication in global trade. In bustling port cities like Bristol or Bordeaux, this code evolved into something even richer. It became a pidgin dialect, a hybrid language carved directly into the wood. The standard marks used by local coopers began to blend with symbols brought by foreign traders. A symbol for whiskey on a barrel from the Scottish Isles would be a unique local glyph, an abbreviation for a word in a Gaelic dialect spoken only in that region. That same symbol would be entirely different from the mark for brandy on a cask made in the French countryside, which used its own Occitan shorthand. Each barrel became a wooden passport, its surface etched with the linguistic key to its long journey across the sea. While the wood absorbed the rich smells of its contents, the marks on its surface told the story of its origin and purpose. This language of trade and geography finds its purest expression in the next great artifact, the map, which charted the world using its own unique and often lost vocabulary. A map's blank spaces were filled with whispered warnings and local knowledge. Early cartographers covered their charts with annotations, scribbling notes in the margins about treacherous currents, sources of fresh water, and the disposition of the people living on the coast. These handwritten comments were often written in the cartographer's native dialect, creating a unique snapshot of regional speech at the moment of contact. Consider a 17th-century Portuguese map of the Caribbean. In the space beside a small, unnamed island, the cartographer has not written the formal word for a bay. Instead, he used a dialect term from his home village, a specific word for a sheltered cove with a particular type of pebble beach. This term, absent from all official geographies, was a piece of hyper-local language that sailed across the world and was stamped onto a chart. These annotations were not for scholars in Lisbon. They were survival guides for sailors, filled with the urgent colloquialisms and slang of the sea. They preserve a unique navigational dialect, a pidgin language that blended precise technical sailing terms with the rough vernacular of explorers and merchants. This language told a captain where to find safe anchorage and which communities were friendly, all in the unguarded speech of the working seafarer. While these maps guided exploration across the oceans, the ships that followed them were themselves floating fortresses of forgotten speech, their very timbers saturated with the language of the voyage. The sound of the sea is still trapped in the ship's timbers. Building a great wooden vessel required the coordinated effort of hundreds of hands, a chorus of different dialects and languages all focused on a single, monumental task. To bring order to this chaos, shipwrights developed a sophisticated system of scratch marks carved directly into the keel, ribs, and planks. This was a universal assembly language, a three-dimensional blueprint etched into the wood itself, guiding workers who might not share a single spoken word. On a Viking longship, the marks ensuring a plank curved perfectly to meet the rib were precise and stark. On a massive Chinese junk, the symbols locking a complex joint into place were intricate and flowing. While the system was universal in its purpose, the specific terms for the parts, scratched beside the assembly marks, were pure local dialect, the word for a specific type of knee joint or a particular fastening peg would be etched in the unique shorthand of the main shipyard, preserving nautical terms that have since vanished from common use. The entire hull, therefore, becomes a carved lexicon of a specific place's maritime speech, a frozen conversation between a shipwright and his crew that sailed the world long after the shipyard itself fell silent. From the high seas and the language of timber and tide, we return to the solid earth and the rhythmic music of the fields. That language of seasons and soil found its most practical form in the farmer's handwritten almanac. Tucked away in a wooden chest, these precious books were more than simple calendars. They were dense with cryptic symbols and hurried annotations, a coded guide to survival written in the farmer's own hand. Before anyone had heard of a standardized planting zone, these pages held a deeply localized dialect, a secret language for working the land. The symbols themselves were a visual shorthand. A circle with a dot inside might not just mean the full moon. In one specific valley, it represented the first full moon after the spring equinox, a signal so precise it was paired with a unique verb for sowing a particular type of barley. This word for sowing, this action of casting seed, was not the formal term found in any dictionary. It was a colloquialism, a grunt of effort and hope that only the farmers in that one watershed understood. Their entire agricultural world was captured in this hyper-local speech. They had specific words for subtle soil types that a geologist would simply call clay. One word described a cold, dense clay perfect for winter storage roots, while another named a warmer, sandy loam ideal for spring legumes. These terms were born from generations of hands in the earth, a linguistic map of the land's character. Even the names for harvest festivals were part of this dialect, celebrating not a generic autumn equinox, but the precise day the last sheaf of a specific grain was brought in from a named field. The almanac was a living document, its pages smudged with soil, its margins filled with observations about a late frost or an early rain, all written in the urgent, practical tongue of the farm. It encoded a wisdom that was perfectly adapted to a single micro-environment, a collection of words and signs that told a family how to eat for another year. This intimate knowledge of the earth, spoken in a forgotten rural tongue, was given physical form by the very tools that broke the ground. The language of the earth was literally forged into the iron that broke it. On the heavy, wedge-shaped shares of a farmer's plow, you can often find a small, raised symbol cast right into the metal near the point where it connected to the wooden frame. To an untrained eye, it might look like a simple foundry mark or a decorative flourish, but for the farmers who relied on these tools, that symbol was a vital piece of information, a single glyph that spoke volumes about the land itself. These casting marks served a dual purpose. They did identify the workshop that made the plow, but more importantly, they indicated the specific type of soil the share was designed to cut. A plow meant for the dense, sticky clay of one river valley would have a completely different mark than one engineered for the loose, sandy soil of a coastal plain. And the names for these soil types, these classifications, were not scientific terms. They were pure, local farming dialect. The dense clay might be called grip earth in one village, while the sandy soil was known as runner earth in the next. These words described not just composition but behavior. Grip earth clung to your boots and your plow, while runner earth let water and roots flow through it too easily. The casting mark was a material representation of that word, a durable iron synonym for a spoken term that told a farmer this tool will work in your fields. This was a technical vocabulary of cultivation, a language essential for survival, baked directly into the plow that ensured a community could eat. The very shape of the share, from its subtle curve to the angle of its point, was a physical manifestation of this hyper-local knowledge, engineered through generations of trial and error to suit a very specific patch of ground. As we harvest the fruits that this plowed earth yielded, we find the next dialect waiting in the very containers that stored them. The coiled patterns of a basket are a silent, three-dimensional language. Generations of weavers encoded their world into the precise over and under of reeds and willow. This is the 12th dialect, a visual speech woven from the land itself. In indigenous cultures across the globe, the specific pattern of a weave was never just about creating a sturdy container. It was a form of communication, a symbolic dialect where every twist and turn held a defined meaning. A tightly coiled spiral in a Native American basket did not simply look like water. It was the word for water, a symbol representing the life-giving force of a spring or river. A zigzag pattern running along the rim might narrate the path of a lightning strike, a key event in a community's oral history. These patterns formed a strict visual vocabulary, a grammar of creation and identity that was read and understood by everyone in that culture. The materials themselves were part of this linguistic world. The weaver did not just gather reeds, she gathered a plant known by a specific name in her local dialect, a word that described its flexibility or its harvest season. The knowledge of which willow branch would bend without breaking was tied to a term for suppleness that exists in no dictionary. Each finished basket, therefore, is a complex, textured sentence. It speaks of its maker's lineage, the stories of her people, and the specific character of the local environment, all woven together into a single, functional object. This intricate language of organic fiber finds a more permanent, fired form in the everyday clay of kitchenware. The very clay of a kitchen bowl holds a chemical echo of its birthplace. Those humble jugs and plates, glazed in earthy greens and deep blues, were not just containers for food. They were the products of a highly localized technical dialect, a spoken recipe that mixed geology with language. Before factories standardized everything, a potter sourced his materials from the landscape right outside his workshop. The recipe for a glaze was a guarded secret, passed from master to apprentice in a cascade of words unique to their village. The ingredients were not called by their scientific names. A particular mineral that produced a vibrant blue was not simply cobalt. In a Portuguese fishing village, it might have been called sea stone or wave eye, a term that described not only its color but also its source in a specific coastal cliff. The potter knew that adding a certain local sand, which he called fire grit, would lower the melting point of the glaze. This entire process, from gathering the clay to judging the final firing temperature, was guided by an oral vocabulary that has been completely erased by industrial production. The pottery itself is the last remaining speaker of this dialect. A slight bubbling in the glaze on an old milk jug is not a flaw. To a linguist, it is a fossilized word. It tells us the firing temperature was a bit too low, a condition the potter likely had a specific dialect term for, perhaps calling it a sleepy fire. The unique orange blush on a terracotta plate from Tuscany comes from a local iron-rich clay known to the potter by a word that translates as sunset earth. Every plate, every cup is a durable chemical record of a place's unique identity, fusing the language of the earth with the speech of the people who worked it. And just as the pot held the language of the earth, the tools that worked its contents spoke in the secret tongue of the cook. Even the bones tell a story of speech. Across archaeological sites, the skeletal remains of butchered animals are etched with a precise, almost grammatical pattern of cut marks. These are not random chops. The specific angle of a blade's entry, the calculated depth of a slice across a joint, and the systematic way a rib cage is cleaved apart form a stark, physical dialect. This was the language of the butcher, a technical vocabulary of disassembly passed down through generations. The tools themselves were an extension of this speech. A particular type of cleaver, known by a specific name in the local vernacular, would leave a distinct, wide gouge. A slender boning knife, called something else entirely, would create fine, shallow scores. In a medieval English town, the community might have split a pig's pelvis in one specific way, a technique tied to a dialect word for the cut of meat around the hip. Just 10 miles away, in a neighboring village, a completely different method was used, reflecting their own unique term for the same joint and the tool required to access it. These bones, therefore, are more than evidence of a meal. They are a durable record of a spoken, practical language, the urgent dialect of sustenance and survival carved directly into the skeleton. This stark language of necessity finds its opposite in a substance of pure sweetness, preserved within the silent architecture of the hive. The silent architecture of the hive holds a map of the local landscape. Traditional beehives, especially those woven from straw called skeps, were often marked on the outside with a unique painted symbol or a small carved glyph. This was the beekeeper's mark, a simple way to identify ownership in a communal apiary. But these symbols often held a second, deeper meaning. A hive mark incorporating a specific leaf shape, like an oak or a clover, did more than just decorate the straw. It communicated to other beekeepers that this colony was known for producing a distinct honey, one sourced primarily from a specific local flower. That flower had a name, of course, but it was a name from the regional dialect, a word with no direct translation into common speech. The bees were foraging from a plant known locally as morning dewbell or rabbit's delight, terms that described not just the flower, but its shape, its scent, or the time of day it opened. The entire beekeeping calendar was guided by this hyper-local language. The beekeeper did not track swarming by the generic month of May. He watched for the blooming of the gold drop bush, a dialect term for a specific flowering shrub that signaled the exact week his hives would be at their most active. His entire practice, from managing the swarm to harvesting the honey, was timed by a spoken almanac of floral events, each one named in a tongue that has since fallen silent. The hive itself, therefore, becomes a wooden repository of linguistic knowledge about a very specific ecosystem, and the rich, golden product of that hive was often stored in containers that spoke their own language. The hot glass held more than just light. It held the physical signature of a guild's secret speech. That rough scar on the bottom of an antique bottle, the pontal mark, is where the molten vessel was cracked from the blowpipe. While collectors often see it as a simple maker's mark, it is far more. The specific way that scar was treated, whether it was ground perfectly smooth, left jagged, or shaped into a small dimple, was a matter of local tradition. This tradition was guided by a precise verbal dialect spoken only within the glasshouse walls. The tools used for this finishing work had names known only to the craftsmen. A specific grinding stone might be called a smoother, while a different abrasive was known as a biter, terms that described their action on the glass in the unique slang of the workshop. The entire process was saturated with this specialized vocabulary. The names for different types of glass itself were part of this lost language. A particular vibrant blue did not come from a generic cobalt. It was created by adding a local copper ore that the glassblowers called dragon's breath or azure sand, names tied to the specific mine and material they used every day. Even the shapes of the vessels were dictated by this dialect. A certain wine bottle with a long, slender neck was not just a bottle. In the Glassblowers Guild of Murano, it was known by a specific term that described its use for a particular local wine, a word that has vanished from modern Italian. The glass, therefore, is a frozen moment of this technical speech, a transparent artifact that still holds the echo of the commands and recipes spoken in the heat of the forge. This fragile, luminous language finds its durable, metallic counterpart in the small, stamped discs we exchange every day. Even the coins in your pocket once spoke in a forgotten local tongue. Before national currencies standardized our money, countless towns and minor lords minted their own small silver and copper pieces. The symbols stamped onto these coins were far more than simple decorations. They were a compact, powerful dialect, encoding local identity and values in durable metal. Take a small silver coin from a medieval German city-state. It might feature a bear, the city's proud symbol, But that bear was not just an image, it was known by a specific dialect term, a local word for the animal that carried connotations of strength and protection unique to that region. The abbreviations circling the coin's edge were equally local. The letters spelling out the mint master's name or the denomination were often carved in a distinctive local script, a variant of Latin that followed its own hyper-local rules of abbreviation. These coins were tiny, circulating dictionaries. Every time a merchant paid a farmer or a customer bought a loaf of bread, this coin passed from hand to hand, disseminating its dialect symbols far and wide. Money talked, and for centuries it spoke in the rich, varied accents of places now absorbed into larger nations. This widespread language of commerce and value finds its more concentrated, scholarly form in the handwritten books that preserved another kind of wealth entirely. The leather cover of a book holds a secret language pressed into its skin. These ornate patterns tooled into old bindings are far more than simple decoration. They are a visual dialect, a coded system of communication used by bookbinders, especially within secluded monastic communities or small town workshops. Each symbol, each interlocking line, carried a specific meaning understood within a very local context. A recurring floral motif stamped in gold on a psalter from a Bavarian monastery might look like a generic rose to us. But to the people of that region, it was a precise representation of their patron saint, known not by her Latin name, but by a local dialect term that translated as the Lady of the Meadow Flowers. The binding announced the book's spiritual allegiance in a tongue spoken only in those hills. Even the physical process of bookbinding was saturated with this specialized speech. The specific technique for tanning the leather to a particular suppleness had a name, a word from the tanner's dialect that described the use of oak bark from a local forest. The brass tools used for stamping the designs were not just called stamps. Each had a distinct name in the binder's workshop slang, a term for a floral roll or a corner piece that was unique to that guild. The book, therefore, is a layered artifact. Its pages contain one language while its cover speaks another, a durable leather lexicon of craft and place that has outlasted the spoken words of its makers. While these books preserved knowledge on a grand scale, the most intimate dialects were often whispered by the objects carried closest to the heart. A child's toy is a capsule of forgotten sound. Those simple clay whistles and carved wooden animals were not just for play. They were instruments of a fleeting, youthful dialect. The toy maker designed them with a specific purpose in mind, to be used in games that were accompanied by chants and rhythmic verses. These rhymes were almost always sung in the thick local dialect, preserving a vocabulary and a unique pronunciation that formal education would later erase. Think of a brightly painted spinning top from a rural Italian village. As children sent it whirling across the cobblestones, they would chant a quick, rhyming verse. That rhyme did not use the standard Italian word for spin. It used a hyper-local dialect term, a word like vortica or gyre, a verb that described the specific, wobbly motion of a top on an uneven surface. This was the secret language of the playground, a linguistic world where rules were made by children and passed down from one generation of kids to the next. The toy itself, through its very form, reinforced this dialect. A clay whistle might be shaped like a local bird, a bird known only by its dialect name, and the sound it produced was meant to mimic that bird's call as described in the local tongue. These objects are artifacts of a social dialect that existed purely within the context of childhood, a playful lexicon that echoed in village squares and dusty lanes. It was a language of rules, of taunts, of counting rhymes for games of hide and seek, all preserved in the collective memory of play. And just as the sounds of children at play formed one layer of a community's voice, the solemn sounds of ritual and belief formed another, deeper echo. The silent performance of a ritual mask holds a complete symbolic vocabulary. In cultures from West Africa to the Pacific Islands, these powerful objects are far more than disguises for the face. They are three-dimensional words, physical manifestations of a ceremonial dialect spoken only during sacred rites. Every aspect of their creation was dictated by a precise oral tradition, a language that named the spiritual forces being invoked. The selection of wood was the first sacred sentence. A carver would not use any tree, but one known by a specific dialect name, perhaps meaning thunderwood or ancestor tree, believed to contain a particular spirit. The pigment for paint was equally specific. A brilliant red was not just a color, it was the word for life force or warrior's courage, made from a local clay known only by its ceremonial name. The carving tools themselves had names in this sacred jargon, and the act of shaping the wood was described with verbs that meant to invite or to release, rather than simply to cut. The mask's final form was a complex grammatical statement. The shape of the eyes, whether round and startled or narrow and slitted, represented specific emotional or spiritual states. The number of teeth carved into a grimacing mouth could correspond to a sacred number from a creation myth, a numerical concept with its own unique term. When a dancer wore the mask in ceremony, he was not just performing, he was becoming a living sentence in this forgotten dialect, his movements giving voice to the symbols carved into the wood. The mask was a frozen performance, a durable script for a sacred conversation that has long since fallen silent. This profound language of spirit and symbol finds its absolute opposite in the cold, precise world of measurement. The mason's brass rod was the local law of the land. Before rulers were standardized, the very definition of a foot or a yard could change from one village to the next, measured against an official rod kept in the town square. These physical standards, often made of iron or brass, were etched with the local units of measurement, each mark representing a unit known by its own dialect name. In one English county, a land measure called a rod might be 16.5 standard feet. But just over the border in the next valley, their rod, which they called a perch, was a slightly different length, reflecting an older way of dividing the fields. The names for the subdivisions were even more localized. What one town called a hand, used for measuring the width of timber, another might call a palm, and the precise number of inches it represented could vary. These were not arbitrary differences. They were a practical, mathematical dialect, a spoken system of geometry that directly governed the size of a house, the area of a field, and the price of a plot of land. The brass rod was the final authority, a physical word that settled disputes between merchants and builders, its immutable length speaking the only measurement language that mattered in that specific place. This language standardized space, while another form of human expression organized time in its own intricate way. The final fret on a lute holds the ghost of a forgotten scale. Luthiers across Europe and Asia did not simply build instruments, they encoded entire musical worlds into wood and wire. The precise placement of the frets on a lute, a vihuela, or an early guitar was a physical manifestation of a local musical dialect. Before equal temperament standardized our modern tuning, each region had its own preferred scales and intervals, creating a sonic fingerprint as distinct as an accent. The decorative inlays of ivory or dark wood that mark these fret positions are more than just ornamentation. They are the visual key to a lost sonic landscape. Consider a vihuela crafted in 16th century Spain. Its fret pattern does not align perfectly with any modern guitar. The spacing is subtly different, creating intervals between notes that sound slightly off to our contemporary ears. This was not a mistake. It was a deliberate tuning system known to the Luthier by a specific dialect term from the region of Aragon, a word that described a scale used in the local courtly music. That word and the unique emotional quality of that scale has since vanished from common use. The instrument itself is the last remaining speaker of this musical dialect, its frets a physical map of a harmony that once defined a culture. After listening to these 22 echoes from the potter's mark to the luthier's fret, a pressing question remains: how do we recover these whispers before they fade to silence? Modern technology offers us powerful new tools for this urgent task. The silent language of a lute's fretwork now finds its translator in the hum of a server. Advanced three-dimensional scanners can map the exact curvature of a pot or the microscopic depth of a tool mark, creating a perfect digital replica. These scans reveal subtleties completely invisible to the naked eye, like the faint pressure variations in a potter's fingerprint that suggest she was left-handed, a cultural trait sometimes linked to specific dialects. Artificial intelligence then takes over, acting as a superhuman linguist. An AI can be fed thousands of images of symbols from amphorae, timber frames, and textile patterns. It cross-references them all, searching for recurring shapes and positional relationships that a single researcher could never connect across continents and centuries. It might identify that a specific zigzag pattern on a Bronze Age pot from Cyprus appears 2 millennia later as a structural mark on a medieval roof truss in France, suggesting a shared symbolic vocabulary for strength that traveled along ancient trade routes. This digital archaeology does not involve digging. It listens, compiling vast databases of what we can now call object languages. Each entry, each scanned symbol, becomes a data point in a grand reconstruction project. Linguists can begin to piece together the grammar of a lost dialect, understanding that a symbol placed to the left of another denotes past tense, or that a red dye made from a certain berry was the word for chieftain. This collaboration between technologist and linguist is more than recovery, it is a form of resurrection. It gives a voice to the voiceless, allowing a farmer's understanding of soil or a weaver's vision of the cosmos to speak across the silence. This technological revival underscores a profound truth. Preserving these echoes is not merely an academic exercise for understanding the past. It is an essential act for our collective future, safeguarding the immense diversity of human thought and the unique ways we have all learned to describe our world. Our journey through these 22 unheard echoes reveals a profound truth: that history is not confined to grand monuments and written chronicles. It lives in the humble, everyday objects that shared our ancestors' lives. A simple clay pot is more than a container. It is a page from an unwritten dictionary of human experience. A wooden chest is a chapter on a builder's secret knowledge. A woven textile is a paragraph from a community's visual story. Preserving these objects is not merely an academic exercise, it is an urgent act of cultural rescue. We are ensuring that the diverse voices of our past, the countless ways humanity has described its world, are not silenced forever. As we move forward in a world that often feels increasingly homogenized, let these forgotten dialects remind us of the breathtaking tapestry of human expression. They whisper that there is never just one way to speak, to build, to measure, or to dream. So we encourage you to look at the objects around you with new eyes. Examine the family heirloom in your cupboard, the old tool in your shed, the quilt passed down through generations. What faint stories might they hold? What silent words are waiting to be heard? Share your thoughts on any unusual markings you have discovered in the comments below, and subscribe for more journeys into the world's historical mysteries.